What would you do if a simple piece of jewelry shattered everything you thought you knew about your past? Imagine standing in a formal military ceremony, surrounded by cameras and decorated officers, when suddenly a worn silver ring stops time itself. That's exactly what happened to General Robert Kane, a man who had spent decades burying a secret so deep that even he had convinced himself it no longer existed. But secrets have a way of surfacing, especially when they're carried on the hand of someone who refuses to let the truth die. The morning started like any other day at Fort Vanguard. The sun cast long shadows across the parade grounds, and inside the main hall, everything was perfectly arranged. Flags stood at attention, their colors vivid against the pristine white walls. Senior officers filled the rows of chairs, their uniforms pressed to perfection, medals gleaming under the overhead lights. This was military precision at its finest, a choreographed dance of protocol and tradition that had been performed countless times before. General Robert Kane walked to the podium with the kind of confidence that comes from 3 decades of service. His shoulders were squared, his expression neutral, his eyes betraying nothing. To everyone in that room, this was just another routine signing ceremony, another promotion, authorization, another name added to the endless roster of military personnel moving up the ranks. The general had signed hundreds of these documents over the years. He could do it in his sleep. Then she appeared. Lieutenant Sarah Calonne emerged from the side entrance, her movements precise and measured. She was young, probably in her late 20s, with dark hair pulled back in a regulation bun. Her uniform was spotless, her posture textbook perfect. Nothing about her stood out, which was exactly the point. She looked like every other junior officer who had ever approached that podium, folder in hand, ready to facilitate the mundane machinery of military bureaucracy. She stopped at the edge of the platform, maintaining the proper distance. Her voice was clear and professional when she spoke. "Sir?" she said, extending a pen toward him. It was such a simple gesture, so routine that nobody in the room gave it a second thought. The cameras continued recording. The audience remained patient. This was just another moment in an endless stream of military formality. But then General Kane reached for the pen, and everything changed. His hands stopped mid-air, fingers frozen just inches from taking the instrument. His eyes had locked onto something on Sarah's right hand. A ring. Simple. Silver. Scratched from years of wear. Most people wouldn't have noticed it at all. Military personnel wear rings all the time. Wedding bands. Family heirlooms. Nothing unusual. But this ring was different. This ring made the general's blood run cold. The room didn't notice at first. The pause was brief, maybe half a second, barely perceptible. But Sarah noticed. She saw the color drain from the general's face. She saw his breath catch, his jaw tighten, and she stood perfectly still, maintaining her professional demeanor, giving nothing away, because she knew. She had known this would happen. She had been counting on it. An aide leaned forward, whispering softly. "General." The words seemed to snap Kane back to reality. He blinked, recovered his composure, and slowly reached out to take the pen. But his eyes never left that ring. Even as he signed the document with a steady hand, even as he maintained his professional expression, his mind was spinning backward through time. That ring. He had seen it before. Not in a ceremony, not in an office, but on a desert road under a sky choked with black smoke. The inscription inside the band flashed through his memory like a lightning strike old the line. 3 words that represented everything the military was supposed to stand for. 3 words that had haunted him for 20 years. The ceremony concluded without further incident. Papers were organized, files collected, the audience began to disperse. Standard procedure, everyone started to move toward the exit, ready to return to their regular duties. But then General Kane did something completely unexpected, something that made every person in that room freeze in their tracks. "Lieutenant Kailane, Said, Alud," his voice cutting through the ambient noise. The room went silent. Officers stopped mid-stride. Aides looked up from their tablets. Even the camera operators seemed to hold their breath. "Yes, sir." Sarah responded, her voice perfectly even. "Where did you get that ring?" Every eye in the hall turned toward her hand. The ring caught the light, its scratched surface, suddenly the center of attention. Sarah didn't look down. She didn't fidget or show any sign of nervousness. Instead, She met the general's gaze directly, and when she spoke, her words were deliberate and clear. "It was given to me, sir, by someone who said you would recognize it." The implications hung in the air like smoke. This wasn't just a piece of jewelry. This was evidence. This was a message. This was the past reaching out with skeletal fingers to grab the present by the throat. 30 minutes later, they were alone in Kane's private office. The general moved to a locked cabin in the corner, his movements slower now, heavier. He pulled out a key, unlocked the cabinet, and revealed stacks of red folders, each one stamped with the words "Top Secret" in bold black letters. These were documents that were never meant to see the light of day, fragments of history that had been deliberately buried. Sarava watched in silence as the general rifled through the folders until he found the one he was looking for. Operation Sand Shadow. He placed it on the desk between them and opened it carefully, as if the pages themselves might explode. The first page showed names. The second showed orders. The third showed handwritten notes in Kane's own writing, ink that had faded but remained legible. His finger traced the lines slowly, and when he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I left them there, and I told myself no one would ever know." Sarah remained silent, but her eyes confirmed what he suspected. She already knew. She knew every detail, every decision, every consequence. She had come here not to learn the truth, but to make him face it. A knock on the door shattered the moment. Sharp, authoritative. The door opened without waiting for permission, and a colonel entered. His uniform was immaculate, his expression cold, his tone clipped and emotionless. "General Kane," he said, "we've received reports that you're discussing classified personnel. You need to step away from those files." Now, Kane's jaw tightened. He knew the rules. He had followed them for his entire career. But rules, he was beginning to realize, sometimes existed to protect the wrong things. "You're here to make sure history stays buried," Kane said quietly. It wasn't a question. The colonel didn't confirm or deny. He simply stared for a moment, then turned and left, closing the door behind him with a soft click that sounded like a threat. Sarah's hand tightened around the ring. "I warned you," she whispered. "They won't let this go easily." Over the next hour, Kane laid out everything. Maps, mission logs, radio transcripts, incident reports. The story of Operation Sand Shadow unfolded like a nightmare. A small unit ordered to hold a position while others evicted. A mission labeled non-survivable by every analyst who reviewed it. A group of soldiers told they were expendable, that their sacrifice would save hundreds of others, and one officer who had volunteered to stay behind. One officer who wore that ring. One officer the records claimed never came back. This mission, Kane said, his voice rough with emotion, was declared impossible from the start. Command knew it. I knew it, but someone had to make the choice about who lived and who didn't. That someone was me. Sarah's voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath. My father survived because he refused to let the truth stay buried. He wanted me to know what really happened, and he wanted you to remember. Kane looked at her with new understanding. She wasn't just another junior officer. She was living proof that the past couldn't be erased simply by filing it away. Outside, the chain of command was reacting. Orders were being sent to recall files. Classified alerts were being triggered. Senior officers were receiving instructions. Contain this situation. Prevent any leaks. Do not let this reach public scrutiny under any circumstances. Kane could feel the walls closing in. If this information gets out, he said, it's not just my career at stake. It's dozens of officers, entire operations, whole departments that could be compromised. Sarah leaned forward, her eyes intense. And yet, she said quietly, if the truth stays buried, yes, again, along with the honor of everyone who sacrificed. The general sat back in his chair, the weight of the decision pressing down on him like a physical force. He could stay silent, protect his rank, preserve his legacy, maintain the system that had kept him safe for decades, or he could speak, expose the cover-up, risk everything he had built, and finally acknowledge what had really happened in that desert 20 years ago. Sarah placed her hand over the ring, the gesture both protective and defiant. Some things, she said softly, are bigger than rank. Some truths are worth any cost. Kane stared at the ring, seeing not just metal and scratches, but the face of a soldier who had given everything. A soldier who had trusted him to make the right choice. A soldier whose daughter now sat across from him, asking him to make that choice again. The general stood, his decision made. He picked up the phone and began making calls, not to the media, not to create a scandal, but to the right channels, oversight committees, special operations archives, select members of key committees in Washington. The truth would be documented, acknowledged, remembered. No leaks, no public spectacle, but permanent, official, undeniable. Sarah watched without speaking, but her expression said everything. The ring glimmered under the office light, no longer just a piece of jewelry, but a symbol of everything. The military was supposed to represent courage, honor, accountability, truth. Within hours, doors burst open again. 2 more senior officers stormed in, their faces tight with barely controlled anger. General Kane, you are exceeding your authority. Stop this immediately. Kane didn't flinch. His voice was steady when he replied. This isn't about authority. This is about acknowledgement, about recognizing what was lost and making sure it's remembered. The officers exchanged uncomfortable glances, but Sarah stepped forward before they could respond. My father survived, she said calmly, because someone refused to let the past disappear. And now, that survival, that sacrifice, will be properly recorded. The finalized files were already moving through channels, maps, logs, personal notes, official reports, everything documented, everything preserved, not for public consumption, but for the historical record. For accountability, for truth. When the senior officers finally read through the files, they fell silent. Operation Sand Shadow was laid bare, the impossible mission. The soldiers left behind, the decision Kane had made under impossible circumstances, and the survival of Daniel Cullen, Sarah's father, a man who had been officially listed as deceased for 2 decades. You did right by him, Kane said quietly to Sarah. She nodded. And right by history. For Kane, this wasn't a victory. It was a reckoning. Years of buried guilt, finally acknowledged. Decisions made under pressure, finally examined. Sacrifices finally honored. He touched the ring lightly, understanding now what it truly represented. Week-spaced. Week-spaced. The ceremony hall at Fort Vanguard hosted another routine event. Sarah stood at the edge again, but everything felt different now. The general watched from a distance, and for the first time in 20 years, the weight on his shoulders felt lighter. The files would remain in the archives forever. Daniel Cullen's name would be recorded not as a casualty, but as a survivor. Operation Sand Shadow would stand as a lesson in leadership, integrity, and the cost of difficult decisions. Sarah's quiet courage had changed the system, one deliberate act at a time. The ring she wore wasn't a relic anymore. It was a promise. A reminder that some truths refuse to die, no matter how deeply they're buried. General Kane finally allowed himself a small smile, not for recognition or power, but for the knowledge that after all these years, history, truth, and honor had finally aligned. The pen had been handed. The ring had been seen, and the past had been acknowledged. Some stories demand to be told, no matter the cost. Some truths are worth every risk. And sometimes, all it takes is one person brave enough to refuse to let history disappear.